My name is Mary Fahrenbruck. It's like Fahrenheit. When I was in third grade, all my friends got the spelling word America, and I got the word Fahrenbruck. So I understand if you mispronounce it. I'm a public school teacher with 28 years of teaching experience, and right now I'm an associate professor in the School of Teacher Preparation, Administration, and Leadership at NMSU. My focus is on language literacy and culture. And I use modules, the modules that I'm going to show you, I use those for instruction in my face-to-face courses and in my online courses.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nicholas Thomas. I teach at Santa Teresa High School in the Gadsden Independent School District. This is going on my 8th year of teaching. I've been teaching at Santa Teresa High School for about 7 years. I'm currently teaching regular English language arts for 12th grade and also advanced placement, English literature and composition. And I am the co-department head, I guess you could say, the co-chair for the ELA department.
Thanks, Nick. I wanted to start with a module overview. This is part of a presentation that we gave last spring. So if you'd like to see the whole video on modules, you can go back and look at some of those recordings that we did last spring. But I wanted to do a quick overview so we're all sort of on the same page. When we talk about a module, what is a module? It's this unit, right? Or it can be a chapter or even a topic, but it's like this self-contained chunk of instruction. It has a beginning and it has an end. And anything along those lines, which is pretty open, can become a module. And so for me, because my focus is literacy, I like to anchor the module with a compelling text. So that's my first step in designing a module. So with this compelling text, I know that I can grab my students' interests. And for me, stories are powerful. Kathy Short tells us that we all live storied lives. And I really like that quote because I think it's true. So what I'd like for you to do now, while I'm talking about the other steps, is I would like for you to think about some compelling texts that your students might enjoy reading in the coming months. So step 2, after I decide on my compelling text, I like to determine what standards or objectives I'm going to embed within this module. Sometimes I have a lot of objectives and sometimes I just have a few. And I just let them flow. I don't force those. But I do always have standards and objectives. When I go to structure the modular, I do these 5 components within each module. So I always have an overview that contains the introduction and the objectives. And I always list the materials for my students, and then I list the assignments for them. I always have readings, then the activities. I ask for a reflection, and then I do an assessment. So these are the components that I have in my modules. And I have examples of those that I'm going to show you on the next couple of slides here. So this is from my reading literacy course that undergrads take as part of their methods course. So you can see that I have the overview listed up here. It's the very first thing that they see, and I always cue them, read me first, so they know where to start. They like this because it gives them a starting point and they know which direction to go. Then I list the modules, the submodules underneath. So I've got module 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And then I have an order, and I keep this order throughout my modules. They have readings, then they have a graphic organizer, then they have a read aloud, then they have a reader response. Reading, graphic organizer, read aloud, reader response. There's an extra assignment, but reading, graphic organizer. So what this does is it kind of has this beginning and this end for them because of the pattern of the way that I structure things. I find that this really helps them navigate through the platform like Canvas. Once they get on there for 4 or 5 classes, it becomes overwhelming for them. So I try and keep a structure in here for them. So let me show you what the overview page looks like. So when they click on that read me first page, they see the overview, and usually it's just a statement about what they're going to find here. Then I do the introduction with the objectives, and then I list the reading materials. And so I have articles and web pages, and with those, I make those live links so that they can access them. And then I have a list of their textbooks and their assignments, and I list all of those and I count them. So for some reason, undergrads respond very well to numbers. So you can see that I've numbered things here and here, 1 through 3, 1 through 2, 1 through 7. They like to have numbers to know how much they have to do. So I use numbers a lot in my modules. Then if we go on to the readings, when I create a page for the readings, I label it at the top. And then again, once they click on this assignment description, it's all inclusive. This is the only thing they need to open. So I tell them about the purpose of the readings, and then I provide all of the links to the readings in here. If they have links, if they're textbooks, I remind them that they have the textbook. So this first reading is actually an instructional video, and I have codes for all of these. So they know what the codes mean as well. So this Halliday's Functions of Language, this is a web page. So they know that they're going to go to a web page when they click on it. This is the read aloud assignment. And so when they click on this page, when they look at the instructional block, I have very clear directions, very clean and crisp. Watch the video, then complete the activity. Then I will upload some videos. I make a lot of my own videos, and this one is a video of my graduate student reading the book, The World's Poorest President Speaks Out. And so they'll watch the video and then they'll do a response strategy. I have them housed on Canvas because then I know that they can watch the video. There's no problem with them going to an outside source to watch a video. This is the reader response strategy. And I know it looks like a lot of text, but what it is it's a description of the assignment and it has links to the handout. Then I have some tips that I provide for them. And again, you can see that I've numbered them. Some tips for completing the assignment. And then I have the due date embedded within. And then I have how to submit their assignment. And oftentimes when I share this, people will tell me that looks like a lot of text. It looks like a lot of work. And I agree with them that it is a lot of work. I tend to front load my courses. And how I front load that is I'll spend a lot of time preparing them, because what happens during the semester is I get very few inquiries about where is that reading at, or what assignment is due next, or when is it due. I don't get a lot of those questions because I put a lot of that information on the page, and all they have to do is look at the page to get that information. And what that does for me that I really appreciate it is that it opens up my time to be a teacher in the class instead of a manager of materials. So I really appreciate that about front loading on Canvas. So that's a little bit about my course. So I will turn this over to Nick next, and he will tell you how he uses modules in his classroom. Nick?
Thank you. So to start off, I attended Dr. Fahrenbruck's webinar last spring over ELA modules and how to create them and use them online. And I thought it was great. And so I decided to try to implement that myself. And the book, or the novel that I was going to read with my students was going to be Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And I believe I mentioned earlier, I teach high school, mostly juniors and seniors. And so this was an appropriate book for the age group. And just to give you a little bit of background about the text, it's called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This was published in 1959, and it's a landmark novel because before this novel was published, it takes place in Africa. It takes place in Nigeria specifically during the 1890s. But before this time, everything that was being written about Africa was being written by non-Africans. And so once this author sort of put this book out there, it sort of changed a lot of the literature, and we wouldn't have some of the books that we have today without this. And so I wanted to introduce this to my students, and it's a great novel. The main character's name is Okonkwo, and basically he is almost like a figure from a Greek tragedy, and that's sort of the lens that I presented it to my students with, that we're going to read this text about a different culture and in a totally different place than what we're used to, but we're going to look at it through this lens of sort of like a tragedy, right? Looking at this tragic hero and what happens to him and sort of what leads to his downfall. And so again, it takes place in Nigeria in the 1890s, and it's about the culture and the community, and many things unfold. And as you all know, tragedies don't end well. So I'm not going to go too into depth. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's a very good multicultural text. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, go out and read it. Or if you're interested in teaching it to your high schoolers, I highly recommend it. And so as Dr. Fahrenbruck mentioned earlier, I have a quote here from Kathy Short, and it talks about stories. And this is some of the ideas and pedagogy that I was sort of thinking of as I was selecting that text, Things Fall Apart. And so I'm going to go ahead, and I know this might be redundant, but I'm going to go ahead and read the quote real quick. Stories are the way our minds make sense of our lives and world. We work at understanding events and people by constructing stories to interpret what is occurring around us. These stories create our views of the world and the lens through which we construct meaning about ourselves and others. We also tell stories to make connections, form relationships, and create community with others. And so that last part of the quote from Kathy Short is probably the most important part for this particular activity, where she talks about making connections and creating community. And so I wanted my students to all sort of dive into a text together and have discussions, lively discussions about that text, and be able to think critically about it, and maybe make connections to their own culture, even though the culture in the text is something completely foreign to them. And so that actually leads me into the next quote here at the bottom, where it says, books can also introduce readers to the history and traditions that are important to any one cultural group, which invite comparisons to their own. And so it's about building that empathy and making those connections with other cultures and other places around the world by comparing them to their own. And so I thought that was really important. And so once I've selected the text, as Dr. Fahrenbruck said earlier, I make sure to have objectives, standards in mind. For this particular class, I was using it for my AP students, my advanced placement students. So the standards and the objectives were a little bit different than the Common Core, which I would use for my regular English language arts students or classes. But it's the same idea. It's taking objectives and creating some sort of assessment based around those skills and objectives that they're going to be working with and learning throughout the unit. And so my assessment was a performance task is what I call it. And at the end of the unit, usually it's a literary argument essay. And so they're going to make some sort of claim about the literature, and they're going to support that claim with evidence from the text. And so all the activities that we do building up to this final assessment are them collecting evidence, discussing the novel, the text, and sort of analyzing different aspects of the literature. We focused on making sure that they knew how to write a thesis, that they knew how to select evidence, that they could provide commentary to back up their evidence and explain the relationship to the thesis statement, and just, general mechanics when it comes to writing. And so the prompt that I gave my students for this particular unit or module was the following. It says, after reading Chinua Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart, write a literary argument in which you analyze and explain how Okonkwo, the protagonist of this text, how Okonkwo's own choices, actions, and speech reveal complexities in his character and explain the function of those complexities. So basically, we are focusing on characterization. And after some reflection on this unit or this module, what I might do in the future, or what I'm going to do this time around, would probably be to take this prompt and make it more student-friendly. That's very wordy and sort of teacher language. I would probably make that a little bit more student-friendly. So, but that was their performance task. That was their assessment, would be to write the literary argument based on the character. And so this is how I sort of structured my module. It was about 5 weeks from beginning to the very end, reading the text all the way up until the assessment. And so I organized it with reading an assigned section of the text to read every week, with activities that would go along that section of the text. And so you can see I have dates, I have the weeks numbered, and I would do this, and I think one of the main things that students appreciate, and I think Dr. Fahrenbruck hit on this earlier, is the consistency and making sure you number things and make sure you're doing it the same way every time so that students get used to it and they see how that works. So some of the students that might finish early, they have the opportunity to work ahead because they know what's coming the next week. Students that might fall behind, I can work with them individually and talk to them and see what they might need to get them caught up. But again, for those students that finish early, they know what's coming next week. And so everything's all organized in order. And again, like Dr. Fahrenbruck said, I'm not answering questions like, what do we have to do this week? When is it due? What are we, how many pages are we reading? And when, things like that. And so it saves a lot of time in the classroom to be able to conference with students individually and work with them one-on-one. Are there any questions, comments, or anything?
So you publish on Canvas or whatever platform you're using, you publish the whole thing all at once so people can work ahead?
Yes, ma'am. So we use, in my district, we use Google Classroom, but I know a lot of districts use Canvas as well. But either way, yeah, posting everything up, front loading, as Dr. Fahrenbruck said, and putting everything up at once so that kids can see this or students can see what's going to be due throughout the unit, not just the following week, but the entire unit. And so we'll sort of talk about that at the beginning and say, okay, we're going to read. These are some of the assignments we're doing, just like Dr. Fahrenbruck laid out the overview of the module. And then at the end, this is what you're expected to do. And I'll know you've learned everything in the unit if you're able to do this task at the end of the unit. And so I think it's a big help. I love the organization that Dr. Fahrenbruck's laid out with the modules. I think it works well.
So a problem that I have had is if I publish it all ahead of time, then kids that are like overachievers will complete the whole thing. And then what do you do with them in class? Because they're done.
That's a great question. You could, for myself, sometimes maybe instead of publishing the whole entire thing, if you know you have those students that are just going to plow right through it and get done, super quick, maybe doing a couple weeks at a time or just maybe giving them the opportunity to work ahead, but not the entire unit or module, or also maybe coming up with some extension activities so to extend their learning. So that would be when I would, give them more maybe visual media, like some videos to watch that are related or relevant to the text. Maybe other readings that are some informational text that can give them some background about the novel or whatever text you're looking at. And this one, I would usually, and I think we're going to come to it later on, but I would definitely give them visual media to sort of spark conversations and stuff like that. And so if you have those overachievers, maybe hold back on those a little bit. And then when the overachievers sort of get everything done, you can say, oh, you know what, there's some more stuff you can sort of engage with that's going to give you a better experience with the text.
The other thing that I think both Nick and I forgot to tell you is that we created these and we used them during COVID, right? So for example, in my class, I had a student who had to drive 20 miles into town and then use the Wi-Fi at the post office to get her assignments. And so that's why I publish everything so that students like that during COVID could come and get, whole modules, download everything, and then take it back to where they were. So that is one thing that we can say is that we did these during COVID. And so there were many circumstances that we had to meet with our students.
Yes, I totally forgot about that as well. When I implemented this, it was during virtual learning and some students were using the school's Wi-Fi. They were driving to the parking lot and getting the school's Wi-Fi, and they had a million different things going on at home. And so the more information I could give them up front so that they wouldn't be confused and add to their stress and everything that's going on with them, it was better for them, more convenient for them. So, but yeah, you could definitely modify it now as circumstances change. Right here actually is a screenshot of my Google Classroom that I was using at the time. And so what I did in Google Classroom, I believe in Google Classroom you use, you can upload assignments and materials through topics. And so what I would do for those topics in Google Classroom is those topics would be my modules or my units of instruction. And so like, if you look at this screenshot, you can see this is unit number 3. I told my students it was a novel study. We called it Mirrors and Windows. There's a quote from Kathy Short, I believe, as well about literature being, mirrors and windows for students to see themselves reflected in the literature, but also being able to view other cultures and other people's experiences as well. And it's sort of a window that way. But this was my module, and so everything's organized by week. And again, I tried to stay consistent with that. Every week had a number, and after a while, I couldn't believe we got up to like week 35, week 36. And then I would have the dates of that week and then the assignment right afterwards. And then the due date you can see right there on the right-hand side as well. And I thought it worked really well with the organization of the modules. And like somebody said in the chat earlier, that all the materials and all the assignments are laid out right there, and you can upload everything all at once. And so you have your unit, and then, for each week you could list all the assignments, and when students click on it, they see everything that they're supposed to do with the instructions and whatnot. And so that's how it looks on Google Classroom. I think we're actually going to go take a closer look at one of the assignments on the next slide. Oh, the next slide after this. But before we get there, the main activity that I would use each week with my students was literature circles or modified literature circles. And basically, this was at the time when we were doing virtual learning. And so they would meet through Google Meet, and which is the same type of Zoom meeting we're having now. And they would talk virtually, just like how we're engaging each other right now. Every week, one day, we would spend an entire class or half a class period to do that. And they would have roles that they would complete every week. And then they would sort of explain what they got out of the text as they read, and they fulfilled their responsibilities of that particular role. And so this activity gives students an opportunity to discuss their thoughts about the text. They collected textual evidence, and then it would reinforce the themes of the unit of instruction or the module. So sometimes I would guide them with specific questions, or sometimes I'd make them focus on certain things, but ultimately it was up to them to engage how they wanted to. This is how it looks. One particular week of instruction looks on Google Classroom. So this was week 31. You can see the date was April 5th through 9th. And they knew that they were going to engage in a literature circle, and this was for chapters 11 through 15 of the text. And then there's a little bit of instruction down there at the bottom, just explaining exactly what to do. And then these attachments here, these files, you can see those are the different roles of literature circle roles that they would be engaging with. And so I don't know if everybody's familiar with literature circles, but it's basically like a little book club. Like everybody reads a section of the book, and then once they're done, they get together and they talk about it. But these roles sort of give them a little bit more structure to do it than just saying, hey, go talk about the text. And so usually literature circles focus on diction. And so the role diction detective, setting, figurative language, and the visualizer one, I've modified that. I used to have students draw something, but now I've changed it to a more character-oriented role for them to look at. So they look at characterization, figurative language, setting, and diction. And then this other attachment here was giving them the specifics about their groups, and so they knew what to do every week, and who they were going to meet with, and how they were going to meet, and what they had to do. And so everything, like we said, is all front-loaded right there for them. And so besides literature circles, the other major component of my module was to have online discussion. So again, this was during virtual learning, and so we couldn't physically meet, but the online discussion really helped them to sort of get their thoughts together, and also added to the sort of connection with each other. The times that they weren't able to speak to each other through video chat or to speak to each other virtually, they could type and have sort of an online discussion with specific prompts that I would give them. And so similar to the literature circles, the online discussions provide all the same opportunities that they do with the literature circles. And then they're hitting the writing portion of the 4 language domains. And the prompts that I would use, they always have the language of whatever standard that I'm using. So for instance, if you're using the Common Core standards, implementing those standards and objectives and putting that language into your questions so that the students are hitting those standards, and you're using that language over and over so they're getting used to hearing it. They're using domain specific language. They're not just saying, you know, oh, that guy, the main character, no, the protagonist, or things like that. And so they were getting used to that domain, the academic language and that domain specific language. And that's just what the online discussion looks like on Google Classroom. So again, you have the week, the dates, the title of the assignment, online discussion, and then right there I have my actual question. It says identify a character in the novel that is different from Okonkwo and think about what makes them so different from the protagonist. Explain the function of contrasting characters. And so these standards were from AP, AP Central and College Board, which are slightly different than Common Core standards. And so I would use these skills and standards with my advanced placement students. And so I'm using that language in my questioning right there, explaining the function of contrasting characters, which is something that they'll have to be able to do if they want to get a qualifying score on the AP exam at the end of the year. And as we mentioned earlier, visual media is a great way to start conversations, to extend learning for those kids that are overachievers. And so the visual media I've included TED Talks. Those seem to work really well, and I had some that were really relevant to this novel. There's lots of resources on YouTube. I prefer a couple of YouTube channels that I can actually type in the chat real quick, but Crash Course, I'm sure some of you are familiar with, TED Talks, 60-second recap, Course Hero, and Schmoop or Spark Notes videos are all very good visual resources to sort of give the students some background and to start conversations and just to get them engaged. It's a good way to start class. I usually like to start class periods with a little video to sort of get kids into the mindset of literary analysis and starting to look at whatever it is that we're going to look at during the day. And so finally, once they've gotten through all the activities that we're doing on a weekly basis, everything is led up to their final assessment. And so as I mentioned earlier, they're going to write a literary argument, and you can see the prompt that I used for that literary argument right there on the right-hand side. And then over on the left, you can see the skills, or these are the standards and objectives that I would get from AP Central and College Board. And so again, the course is AP English Literature and Composition. And so I got that from the course and exam description, which is like the sort of Bible, if you will, for that course in the advanced placement. And so those skill sets right there, they're all based on character and characterization. And so that's how I created my performance task, my assessment, which was the literary argument essay that they were going to write. And that is pretty much it. These are the things that I would reflect on and that I thought I could change. And so things that I would think about after implementing this module would be, how can I include more interventions, more supports, more scaffolding if it's needed? And that was definitely something I had to think about during virtual learning, because it was new to everybody and everybody needed certain supports and scaffolds and things like that. Maybe giving the students a survey for some feedback or something like that, and seeing, you know, what sort of struggles did they have and what sort of successes did they have as well during the unit or module, and then ways to include more student choice and autonomy. And then how can I modify and revise the module for next time? And so I've done that this year. Currently, I'm reading 1984 with my advanced placement students. And so I've made some changes based on these sort of questions right here. And so, yeah, it works really well. These are our resources, like as I mentioned earlier, TED Talks, TED Ed is a really good one, Crash Course. There's also some links for literature circles if you're interested in using those in your own classroom. And then, of course, the Common Core state standards, and then the AP English Literature and Composition course and exam description that I was talking about as well.